By the mid-90s, the 64-bit generation would usher in a new age of gaming dominated by analog sticks, expansive worlds, and polygonal 3D graphics. Castlevania would once again be resurrected onto these new platforms, with several games that would redefine the series over the next 2 decades.
What is a man? A miserable little pile of secrets! But enough talk! How about you?
Originally conceived for the Sega 32X as a project titled The Bloodletting, Castlevania Symphony of the Night would be released in 1997 for the Sony PlayStation and take the series in a new direction. Serving as a direct sequel to Rondo of Blood, Symphony of the Night would also be directed by Toru Hagihara, who, midway through development, would be promoted to head of the division developing the game at Konami. Hagihara would then ask Koji Igarashi to finish the project, promoting him to assistant director. Igarashi would later go on to produce many more games in the series. Taking place 5 years after the events of Rondo of Blood, the game stars Dracula's son, Alucard. After waking from a self-induced sleep, Alucard sets out to explore Dracula's castle in search of Richter Belmont, who, after defeating Dracula at the end of Rondo of Blood, has disappeared. Maria, who is now Richter's sister-in-law, also enters the castle and helps Alucard in the search for the missing Belmont. Alucard must navigate the huge, labyrinthian rooms of the castle in order to open new areas to find the missing Richter and defeat his father. The developers purposely took the gameplay in a new direction with Symphony of the Night. Igarashi had desired to create a game that, quote, could be enjoyed for a long time, as he felt that previous entries of the series had been too short. Because of this, Symphony of the Night features a non-linear style, with an emphasis on exploration. Symphony of the Night's backtracking was heavily inspired by The Legend of Zelda, making most of the areas of the castle inaccessible at first, and requiring the player to obtain new items and upgrades to progress to new areas. RPG mechanics were also added, as Hagihara felt that previous entries in the series had been too challenging for casual players. As Alucard defeats enemies and levels up, he can increase his stats, equip new weapons, armor, or accessories, and find special items such as life max-ups and MP max-ups that can increase his maximum HP and MP respectively. Despite these changes, core elements of previous Castlevania titles remain, with the game retaining the side-scrolling action hack-and-slash playstyle that defined earlier games in the series, as well as the ability to collect and equip sub-weapons such as knives, axes, and holy water. The game's soundtrack was composed by Castlevania Bloodlines composer Michiru Yamane, and features a range of musical styles from classical and jazz to techno and heavy metal. Despite receiving widespread critical acclaim upon its release, Symphony of the Night did not sell well initially, moving roughly 60,000 copies per region. This was attributed by some to the game's 2D graphic style, which, when compared to full 3D games of the time such as Super Mario 64 and Final Fantasy VII, looked out of date upon initial impression. However, due to high critical praise and word of mouth, the game became a sleeper hit, and is today considered one of the greatest Castlevania games. It is also considered a turning point for the series, as it would establish many conventions of future entries going forward. Symphony of the Night is also credited by some, alongside Super Metroid a few years earlier, with giving birth to what is now known as the Metroidvania genre, which has since become hugely popular, particularly with modern indie games such as Hollow Knight, Axiom Verge, and Ori and the Blind Forest. In Japan, the game would be ported to the Sega Saturn, with a few changes such as 2 new regions, slightly altered graphics, and Maria and Richter being playable from the start of the game. This version is often considered to be lower quality than the PlayStation one, due to longer load times and graphical issues. This was likely due to poor coding on the part of the development team, which was made up of completely different people. On the Nintendo 64, the Castlevania series would see its first full 3D game, Castlevania, or Castlevania 64 as it was later dubbed by fans in the media. Released in 1999, Castlevania would be the first game in the series to implement full 3D movement, a targeting system, and different camera controls. Additionally, a day and night cycle was added, similar to that of The Legend of Zelda Majora's Mask a year later. Depending on the time of day, certain events would be triggered, such as different areas being accessible, as well as certain characters appearing. Although many of these new features were implemented, the gameplay would center around core elements of previous titles, with an emphasis on exploration and platforming. Unlike Symphony of the Night, however, the game would be fairly linear, with players unable to return to previous levels once completed. Castlevania has 2 playable characters, Reinhard Schneider and Carrie Fernandez, who set out to Dracula's castle after the people of Transylvania start to descend into wickedness. Sensing the Count's imminent return, they alone must face him. Depending on which protagonist the player chooses at the beginning of the game, different levels can be accessed. Although initial reviews were positive, with praise for its graphics, music, and atmosphere, the game received a lot of criticism for its clunky controls and camera. Castlevania Legacy of Darkness would release later that year for the Nintendo 64, serving as both a prequel and enhanced version of the previous title. Legacy of Darkness includes additional levels, gameplay modes, and characters that were originally intended to be included in the first Nintendo 64 title. The game stars Cornell, a man-beast who is trying to save his sister, Ada, from being sacrificed to Dracula. After Cornell encounters an estate owned by the Oldry family, he, by their request, saves their son Henry, who later embarks on his own quest to save some kidnapped children. The game primarily features these two quests, with the addition of both Carrie Fernandez and Reinhard Schneider's quests from the first game, which can be unlocked after completing the initial 2 campaigns. Like the first game, the gameplay largely emphasizes platforming and also incorporates some survival horror elements. The game received mixed reviews, and both Castlevania 64 and Legacy of Darkness have since been removed from the official timeline. In 2001, the PlayStation port of the Japan-only title Akamaju Dracula, originally released for the Sharp X68000, would be released as Castlevania Chronicles. Featuring the same plot and largely the same gameplay mechanics, it would receive enhanced graphics, rendered cutscenes, added items, and redesigned stages. In addition, the player has the option of various different sound modules and can choose between the original Sharp version of the game or the enhanced Arrange mode. The plot is classic Castlevania, featuring Simon Belmont on a quest to defeat Dracula. 3 Castlevania games would be released for the Game Boy Advance from 2001 to 2003. The first of these titles, Castlevania Circle of the Moon, would adopt the formula established in Symphony of the Night, featuring 2D platforming, RPG mechanics, and non-linear exploration. It would introduce a dual setup system, which centered around magic cards found throughout the game that determines the type of magic that is used based on various different combinations. The story centers around Nathan Graves, whose parents died while trying to banish Dracula. Nathan is trained by Morris Baldwin to defeat Dracula, who gives him the Hunter Whip against the wishes of his son Hugh. The 3 men go to an old castle where a minion of Dracula, Camilla, revives the vampire. Dracula destroys the floor underneath them, causing Nathan and Hugh to be separated by Morris, whose soul, it is later found out, will be used to revitalize Dracula's powers with the coming of the next full moon. Circle of the Moon was praised for its graphics, story, and gameplay mechanics, closely mirroring that of Symphony of the Night, and is often considered one of the best handheld games in the series. Castlevania Harmony of Dissonance would follow in 2002, this time with Koji Igarashi of Symphony of the Night and Castlevania Chronicles fame serving as producer. Igarashi had been critical of Circle of the Moon, criticizing the game's control scheme and card system. Because of this, Igarashi developed the game with the intent of creating something closer in line with Symphony of the Night, scrapping the card system with a fusion spell system. The controls and graphics were also improved, with Igarashi feeling that Circle of the Moon's graphics had been too dark. Harmony of Dissonance would also mark the return of 2 other veterans of the series, Symphony of the Night artist Ayami Kojima and composer Michiru Yamane. The game stars Jute Belmont, grandson of the legendary Simon Belmont, who embarks on a quest to save childhood friend Liddy Erlanger and Maxim Kashin, the latter who is trying to prove himself after Jute is chosen to receive the legendary Belmont Whip, the vampire killer. After Maxim attempts to resurrect Dracula to defeat him and prove himself, he becomes possessed by Dracula's evil, and Jute sets out to collect Dracula's remains and save both Maxim and Liddy. Harmony of Dissonance received mostly positive reviews, though the music was heavily criticized, with some even regarding it as the worst soundtrack of the series. And retrospective reviews have since considered it the weakest of the 3 Game Boy Advance titles. Developed in tandem with Harmony of Dissonance, the third and final title released for the Game Boy Advance, Castlevania Aria of Sorrow, would be released in 2003. Aria of Sorrow features similar gameplay elements to the first 2 titles, such as 2D platforming and RPG mechanics, with the addition of a tactical souls system, which allows the player to absorb the souls of enemies to gain more abilities. Additional modes were also added with a boss rush mode, Julius mode, which unlocks another playable character, Julius Belmont, and a New Game Plus option, which allows the player to replay the entire game with all of their abilities and souls. Although the game mechanics were largely similar, Igarashi decided to take the game in a different direction by incorporating a more contemporary setting. The game follows Soma Cruz, a high school exchange student in Japan who visits the Hakuba Shrine during a solar eclipse. After being drawn into the eclipse, Soma and his friend Mina Hakuba find themselves in Dracula's castle, where they meet a government agent named Arikado who explains to them the power of observing souls, and that they are in Dracula's castle. The game received widespread critical acclaim and is considered by many to be the very best Castlevania entry on the Game Boy Advance, with critics praising the graphics, music, and the soul system. The series' foray into full 3D would not end with the Nintendo 64. Released in 2003 for the PlayStation 2, Castlevania Lament of Innocence would be the first true blending of the Metroidvania-style mechanics of Symphony of the Night into a full 3D environment. Once again produced by Igarashi, With art by Kojima and Yamane as composer, Lament of Innocence would once again take the series in a different direction. Set canonically as the very first game in the Castlevania timeline, the game stars Leon Belmont, and sought to establish the origins of the series surrounding the eternal war between the Belmont clan and Dracula. When his friend Matthias Kronkvist tells him that his betrothed Sarah has been kidnapped by a vampire named Walter Bernard, Leon heads to Walter's castle to confront him and save Sarah. On his way, he meets an alchemist named Rinaldo Gandolfi, who gives him a whip crafted by alchemy. Leon must defeat the 5 monsters before he can open the way to Walter and save Sarah. Although incorporating many of the Metroidvania mechanics of previous entries in the series, the game does not feature experience points or a leveling up system, but does feature sub-weapons and relics. As the player progresses through the game, Leon will learn new abilities after triggering certain actions or defeating enemies. The game also featured extra modes that featured different playable characters and skill levels. The game fared far better critically than its N64 predecessors, with praise for exploration, atmosphere, and music, although some criticized it for being repetitive and underdeveloped. In 2005, a direct sequel to Castlevania Aria of Sorrow would be released for the Nintendo DS. Castlevania Dawn of Sorrow would feature many of the same elements as its predecessor, such as the Metroidvania-style gameplay and tactical soul system. Dawn of Sorrow would also introduce a magic seal system, which utilized the Nintendo DS's touchscreen. In order to trap defeated bosses, the player is required to draw an intricate pattern or seal on the touchscreen. The game features a versus mode, where 2 players race to defeat enemies and complete the level. Julius mode also returns as well, this time featuring 2 other playable characters that the player can switch between, in a homage to Castlevania III: Dracula's Curse. The game's story takes place 1 year after the events of Aria of Sorrow, once again featuring Soma Cruz as the main protagonist. During the events of Aria of Sorrow, Soma realized he was a reincarnation of Dracula. After having escaped his fate of becoming the new Count Dracula, a cult led by Graham Jones, the previous game's antagonist, seeks to kill Soma and revive the dark power of Dracula inside of him. Soma faces them inside a castle constructed by the cult. Like its predecessor, Dawn of Sorrow sold well and received critical acclaim, with some publications calling it the best Nintendo DS game of 2005. Also in 2005, Castlevania Curse of Darkness would be released for the PlayStation 2 and Xbox. Once again developed by Igarashi, with music by Yamane and art by Kojima, Curse of Darkness, although being similar to the gameplay style of Lament of Innocence, would be a departure in several different ways. Throwing out the hub world formula of its predecessor, Curse of Darkness would feature a more complete world to explore in the same vein as Symphony of the Night. Curse of Darkness would incorporate a more action-adventure style to it, and feature a variety of different equipable weapons such as spears, axes, and brass knuckles, as well as special items like Gatling guns. Also unlike previous titles, most of Curse of Darkness does not take place in Dracula's castle, but different locations like forests, temples, mountains, and ruins that are spread across Europe. Taking place 3 years after the events of Castlevania III: Dracula's Curse, the game stars Hector, a former associate of Dracula's and Devil Forge Master, who leaves the Count's employ to seek a quiet life after being disenfranchised by the vampire's evil methods. After Hector's fiancée, Rosalie, is burnt at the stake for being accused as a witch, he seeks revenge and learns that her murder was carried out by Isaac, a former rival and fellow Forge Master. Along the way, Hector meets Trevor Belmont, the main protagonist of Dracula's Curse, who eventually becomes playable after completing the game. The game received generally positive reviews for its battle system, but criticized the game's environments as repetitive. 2 more Castlevania games would be released for the Nintendo DS in 2006 and 2008. The first of these, Castlevania Portrait of Ruin, is a sequel to Castlevania Bloodlines, featuring 2 new playable characters, Jonathan Morris, son of Bloodlines' John Morris, and heir to the Vampire Killer, and Charlotte Allen, a sorceress and descendant of the Bonaldes clan. After a vampire artist named Bronner revives Dracula's castle, Jonathan and Charlotte set out to stop him, only to encounter a priest named Vincent who has been sent to destroy Castlevania. They enter the castle and encounter a mysterious entity named Wind, who imparts knowledge to them. Along the way, they also meet Loretta and Stella, the latter of whom drops a pendant after she is defeated, revealing the truth, that Wind is the ghost of Eric Lacarde from Castlevania Bloodlines, and that Loretta and Stella are his daughters. Only after reawakening Loretta and Stella can the pair revive the power of the Vampire Killer to stop Bronner. The gameplay would be largely similar to that of Dawn of Sorrow, featuring a character swapping mechanic similar to that of Dawn of Sorrow's Julius mode. As they progress, each character learns unique skills and collects equipment. The game would also feature several different modes such as Sisters mode, featuring Loretta and Stella as playable characters, Richter mode featuring Richter Belmont and Maria from Rondo of Blood, Old Axe mode featuring the Old Axe enemy, and a Boss Rush mode. Portrait of Ruin was another successful entry and received mostly positive reviews. The final Nintendo DS entry, Castlevania Order of Ecclesia, would be released in 2008. Taking place directly after the events of Symphony of the Night, Order of Ecclesia would be only the second game in the franchise to feature a female protagonist. After the disappearance of the Belmont clan, several organizations would form to counter Dracula's return. One of these, the Order of Ecclesia, has chosen Shanoa by their leader Barlow as a vessel for Dominus, a triad of magical glyphs. As the ritual of her union begins, the three glyphs of anger, hatred, and agony are stolen by her colleague Albus, and she loses her memories and emotions. She seeks to retrieve the glyphs, and along the way discovers Barlow's true intentions, to use Shanoa as a sacrifice to resurrect Dracula. The gameplay again adopts the 2D side-scrolling formula as the previous DS entries, with the addition of a glyph system, which allows the player to equip glyph symbols acquired by defeating enemies. These symbols give her the power to use special skills and powers. Equipping different combinations of glyph symbols in each hand also gives the ability to perform a glyph union, a more powerful attack that consumes hearts. The game also included online play, which gave players the option to trade items as well as a versus mode. Order of Ecclesia was also very well received, rounding off the Nintendo DS trilogy of games. Around this time, two classic Castlevania titles would be remade and re-released, both produced by Igarashi. The first of these, Castlevania the Dracula X Chronicles, an enhanced port of Rondo of Blood, would be released for the PSP in 2007. Igarashi has stated that part of the motivation for this re-release was due to the popularity of Symphony of the Night, which many fans have also considered a turning point for the series. However, Igarashi felt that the turning point was actually Rondo of Blood, and wanted Western fans to be able to experience the game for the first time. Dracula X Chronicles features completely redone cutscenes and voice acting, with artwork redesigned by now longtime series art designer Ayami Kojima, as well as full 3D graphics, and the dialogue between Richter and Dracula, now matching Symphony of the Night's infamous opening scene line for line. The game also featured a full port of Symphony of the Night as well, which can be unlocked by finding a certain item in the game. Dracula X Chronicles received mostly positive reviews, although some criticized its difficulty in voice acting. The second port, Castlevania The Adventure Rebirth, a remake of Castlevania The Adventure for the Game Boy, would be released exclusively for the WiiWare service in 2009. Unlike the original, it would feature sub-weapons that can be utilized such as the knife, axe, and holy water, and 6 stages. The graphics and music would see an overhaul as well, and the game was praised for its graphics and sound. Unfortunately, due to the Wii Shop channel being shut down in early 2019, the game is no longer widely available. Castlevania Judgment would also be released on the Nintendo Wii in 2008, and would be the first and only fighting game of the series. Featuring many characters across the franchise's long history, such as Simon and Trevor Belmont, Sypha Benaldes, Eric Lacarde, Alucard, and many more, the game would feature Wii motion controls to execute moves, and sub-weapons, with various button combinations executing different moves. The game featured several different modes such as a verse mode, arcade mode, and a story mode, each with different scenarios. The game was not received well, with many feeling that it felt too disconnected from the rest of the franchise. Common complaints included the art direction, which many felt was out of place, the camera, and the controls. Around this time, the Castlevania series had been suffering from poor sales figures, and a number of games in development were competing to be the next title in the series, including another game produced by Igarashi. Spanish studio Mercury Steam was also developing a title, which Konami initially greenlit as an original IP. While still in the early stages of development, Konami nearly canceled the project until producer David Cox showed the game to Japanese senior management at Konami, and were offered assistance by Metal Gear Solid producer and veteran Hideo Kojima. Castlevania Lords of Shadow would be released in 2010 for the PlayStation 3, Xbox 360, and PC, with the intent of once again rebooting the series. The game was originally conceived as a remake of the first Castlevania for the NES, but ultimately took a different direction, although heavy inspiration was drawn from the original. Lords of Shadow features third-person action gameplay, centered around a whip called the Combat Cross, which can be utilized for quick short-range attacks and long-range attacks. The Combat Cross can also be upgraded via a light and shadow magic system that can boost defensive and offensive moves. The whip can also be used for exploration, for climbing walls or swinging across ledges. The story centers around Gabriel Belmont, a member of the Brotherhood of Light whose purpose is to defend the innocent from the malevolent Lords of Shadow, who have placed a dark spell on the souls of the dead, preventing their ascension to heaven. After the Lords of Shadow murder Gabriel's wife, Marie, her spirit guides him to defeat the Lords of Shadow, as he seeks the pieces of the God Mask to resurrect her. The game features full voice acting, with Patrick Stewart narrating the story and playing a character named Zobek.
I am Zobek, a warrior of your brotherhood.
The game was very well received and often compared with other action games of the time such as God of War 3 and Bayonetta. Perhaps more importantly, The game was a commercial success, selling over 1 million copies and incentivizing Konami to continue the series. Following Lords of Shadow's release, longtime series veteran Koji Igarashi would be moved to Konami's social division in 2011. Although he would go on to produce a few more titles for Konami, he would not produce another Castlevania title, and ultimately resigned from the company, feeling that his experience in developing console games did not translate well to Konami's shift to mobile games. 2 sequels would follow, the first of these being Castlevania, Lords of Shadow Mirror of Fate, released on the Nintendo 3DS in 2013. Mirror of Fate, unlike its predecessor, featured 2.5D style platforming, with gameplay similar to the traditional style Castlevania games, featuring sub-weapons and some mechanics from Lords of Shadow. Taking place 25 years after the events of the first game, Mirror of Fate features 4 separate playable characters in different scenarios across several different time periods. Gabriel Belmont returns from the first title in the prologue, making love to his wife Marie before he goes off to slay Lycan. While he is gone, Marie gives birth to a son named Trevor, who is then taken by the Order. Simon Belmont returns in the next story, as Trevor's son who witnesses the death of his parents by Dracula's forces. He swears revenge on Dracula and trains hard, eventually returning to the land of his birth to kill Dracula. Alucard awakens in his tomb with amnesia, and believes his fate is to destroy Dracula. He journeys through the castle and saves Simon a few times, until the two are eventually confronted by Dracula. Trevor Belmont is raised by the Brotherhood of Light. His mother, Marie, keeps all knowledge of his existence from Gabriel, knowing that Trevor will be humanity's only hope of defeating Gabriel after he transforms into Dracula. Years later, after finding out that Gabriel murdered his mother, Trevor sets out to take revenge on Dracula for her death. The game received relatively mixed reviews, with praise for its visuals and combat system, but criticizing its easy difficulty and story. A full HD version of the game would be released later that year on PS3 and Xbox 360, as well as on Steam the following year. The third and final entry of Mercury Steam's Lords of Shadow trilogy, Castlevania Lords of Shadow 2, would release the following year for the PlayStation 3, Xbox 360, and Steam. It would serve as a direct sequel to the first 2 games, and be the first game in the series' history to feature Dracula, formerly Gabriel Belmont, as the main playable character. His main weapon, the Shadow Whip, plays similarly to that of the Combat Cross from the first game. Additionally, the Void Sword and Chaos Claws replace the magic system from the first game. The Void Sword can replenish health, while the Chaos Claws can be used for more powerful attacks. Various transformations allow Dracula to utilize different abilities, such as transforming into a rat to avoid enemies, or as mist to pass through bars or fly to higher platforms. The game was much larger than the first game, featuring an open world with more emphasis on exploration. The game begins with Dracula confronting the Brotherhood of Light in his castle. After defeating them, he confronts Alucard, the revived form of Trevor Belmont. 1,000 years later, Dracula awakens suffering from starvation and amnesia. He encounters Zobek, who warns him about the resurrection of Satan. Wishing to end his mortality, Dracula agrees to stop the people trying to resurrect Satan in exchange for the vampire killer, the only weapon capable of destroying him. Although having sold relatively well, the game received mixed reviews, with praise for the combat and visuals of the medieval setting, although some criticized the modern setting. Although 2014's Lords of Shadow 2 would be the final mainline game of the series to date, Castlevania has been far from dead for the last 5 years. In 2017, as part of the DLC for Super Bomberman R, several new bombers inspired by Simon Belmont, Alucard, and Dracula would be released, including some new remixes of Castlevania music. Also in 2017, Netflix's Castlevania animated series would officially premiere, featuring anime-style art inspired Ayami Kojima's work on past Castlevania games. Castlevania's plot would be heavily based on Castlevania 3, Dracula's Curse, featuring Trevor Belmont, Dracula, Sypha Bonaldes, and Alucard as the main characters, and taking place in Wallachia, featuring iconic settings like Dracula's castle. The show would also incorporate elements of Castlevania Curse of Darkness in later seasons, featuring both Hector and Isaac as Forge Masters and allies of Dracula, as well as the vampiress Carmilla, an enemy from several games in the series. As of March 2020, 3 seasons have premiered, with a 4th greenlit shortly after Season 3 was released. The series has received widespread critical acclaim and has since become one of the most successful original animated series by Netflix, with an estimated 30 million viewers worldwide. 2018 would see another prolific moment for the series in recent years, with the inclusion of both Simon and Richter Belmont as playable characters in Super Smash Bros. Ultimate for the Nintendo Switch. Also featuring Dracula's castle as a stage, spirits of many other characters from the series, Alucard as an assist trophy, and Dracula and other monsters as bosses. Super Smash Bros. Ultimate would bring even more attention to the Castlevania series. Also in 2018, Castlevania Requiem would be released exclusively for the PS4 as a port of both Rondo of Blood and Symphony of the Night. Castlevania Anniversary Collection would release the following year on all platforms, in celebration of Konami's 50th anniversary. Featuring the first 4 Castlevania titles, Bloodlines, and the first 2 original Game Boy titles, it would also feature the Japan-only Famicom spin-off, Kid Dracula, for the very first time in English. 2018 and 2019 also saw the release of 2 spiritual successors to the franchise, Bloodstained, Curse of the Moon, and Bloodstained, Ritual of the Night, respectively. The latter was conceived initially in 2015 by series veteran Koji Igarashi, shortly after his departure from Konami as a new Metroidvania-style title, and a Kickstarter began that year. Within 4 hours of going live, the Kickstarter met its goal, raising $1.5 million within the first day. More stretch goals were made, including getting David Hayter, an Alucard's voice actor in Symphony of the Night, Robert Belgrade, to do voiceovers for the game. The retro-style companion game, Curse of the Moon, also reached its stretch goal, and was released first as a classic NES-style game, similar to Dracula's Curse. Ritual of the Night followed in 2019, featuring artist Ayami Kojima and composer Michiru Yamane, as a Symphony of the Night-style Metroidvania. Both Curse of the Moon and Ritual of the Night were well received, and to date have been the closest thing we have had to a classic Castlevania-style release. At the end of 2019, Castlevania Grimoire of Souls was announced as a free-to-play mobile game featuring several different characters across the series' long history, and includes a variety of single-player and multiplayer modes, as well as RPG mechanics in a boss rush mode. The game was released exclusively in Canada in September 2019, but is yet to receive a worldwide release. The Castlevania series has had a long, terrifying history throughout the ages of gaming, from its haunting beginnings on the NES, as a homage to the cinematic themes that inspired it, to genre-defining innovations that would influence countless other games and define a generation. The Castlevania series has, time after time, carved its own path, and rightfully earned its legendary status as one of the longest-running and most enduring franchises in modern gaming history. Although having laid dormant in recent years, there's no question that Castlevania will once again rise from the grave. As time has proven over and over, Castlevania not only survives, but indeed thrives in the darkness. I want to thank everyone for watching both this video and the first part of this Castlevania retrospective, and thank everyone for their patience during the long gap between the 2 releases. Seriously, it was a long time. Thanks guys for sticking with me. I have more videos like this in the works, including more brief history videos and other video essay style gaming documentaries. I plan to release both parts of this video as one video in the near future, for those who'd like to watch the entire piece as one, so keep an eye out for that. The next planned brief history video is going to be a brief history of The Legend of Zelda, which should be quite comprehensive and big, and I've got some people helping me out, a couple people you may know, so that should be interesting. But either way, I hope you'll check those out, as well as my many other videos on the channel, and give me a like and subscribe if you enjoyed my content. In the meantime, this is Castlevania. Die! Okay, that was cringy.